Speaking next in favor is Polly Olsen. Representative Tranel is going to take the chair for just a second. So,
whenever you're ready.
I think it's important to share a little bit of my story so that you know where that I'm coming from. In 2014, my mom lost her battle to, 2013, my mom lost her battle to cancer. And my dad lost his job, and my brother broke his neck. 2014, I went on campus to carry on a tradition that me and my mom have been doing since I was little, handing out these little valentines saying, Jesus loves you. Now, policy. That's why we're here. Bad policy is why I'm here. The school told me that I was engaging in solicitation by handing out valentines to my fellow students and faculty members. I told them that it was my constitutional right. I had just started a Christian club. They said, nope, it's still violating our policy and it is soliciting. I again said, it's my constitutional right. Again, they said, nope, you have to go to a certain area if you're going to exercise this solicitation that you're doing. So I was told that there was this free speech zone that I was to be banned to in order to hand out my valentines. Then I filed a discrimination report with the school, and it was ignored. It was passed around and around from different departments that wanted to keep it hush-hush. I spent 3 months trying to get a meeting with the school because during that time, they had made contacts with my Christian club that had nothing to do with it. They had told my club that there was disruptive students on campus. Handing out a valentine is disruptive behavior, according to my school's policy. That is not constitutional. So I then went to the president of the school. I told him my story. He's like, oh, well, there must be some misunderstanding. So he organized a meeting where I had contacted American Center of Law and Justice, and they had sent me the laws that the school had violated and told me to talk to the school. I brought those laws to the school, and they laughed in my face and said it would never stand up in court, and that because I was taking a semester off, I wasn't technically a student. According to their policies, it says any student is a person who has an ongoing relationship with the campus. I had that just because I was trying to survive the trauma that I had gone through the year previous to that semester. I was told I wasn't a student anymore. So they agreed finally, after telling them my story of what I had just gone through, that they would change policy and make it constitutional and educate their staff on their constitutional or on student constitutional rights. 4 years later, I was doing my research on First Amendment rights on campus. They had promised they would educate their staff. So I figured, well, let's start looking at these policies that they're educating their staff on. Not one of them talked about students' First Amendment rights. The staff had no idea, and yet they were the ones who were enforcing this policy that was unconstitutional. So that was 2017. 2018, I did the same thing. I handed out my valentines, and within 15 minutes of setting foot on campus, I was told I was soliciting. I was told that the messages on my valentines were possibly offensive. I was told that I was engaging in disruptive behavior. How is that disruptive? Being kind to one another. So That's the beginning of the story. It went on to catch our president's attention. He called me to the White House to speak on behalf of freedom of speech of students who are being shut down because of policies or biased selection of speakers or events. I was one of 200 students called to the White House that day. They all had similar stories, if not worse than mine. One person was blacklisted from the college. 400 faculty members signed a removal statement for this student because she was tabling. That's all she was doing. She was respectfully tabling for an issue, and the campus had 400 staff members try to blacklist her and remove her from campus. So this story of mine is one, but it represents many. I had the knowledge of my rights because I was homeschooled. My mom said, one day your rights will be violated and you will have to stand up for them, so you need to know what they are. Now, during that process in 2014, I had many students that had no idea what their rights were. They said that I was just trying to get attention, or it wasn't really that important to stand up for my rights. They didn't know what they were. They were clueless. And on top of that, obviously, the staff at the school did not know their rights or the rights of students. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be here. So, I was called to the White House to speak on behalf of the many students that are not being heard. Because the process that I went through to even get the school to agree to change the policy took me 3 months in the midst of my trauma in my life. No student's going to go through that, at least normal students. The process to actually file a discrimination report takes time, and it's tedious. Then you're met with administrations that don't want to hear you, that say, that'll never stand up in court. You don't know what you're talking about. No student's going to go through that. So policy like this provides accountability to administrations because it removes it off their shoulders and puts it in law. So they have to be abiding by what the law is saying, or they're going to be held accountable. There's accountability that is put in place by a bill like this. On top of that, it puts accountability on the student. By having these rules, this law, actually given an orientation to students and faculty, it puts responsibility on them to act in a responsible way. We talked about speech comes with responsibility. Now, we see a lot of students that are not taking their speech with responsibility. That's why this bill has come up, because they shut down people who are trying to deliver a message that they don't agree with. But what about those 100 students that want to hear that? Or 200, 300 students? That's 300 people being violated their rights by a minute few. And there's no consequences for those minute few. They just shut down the freedom of speech of over 100 people or more, depending on the event. How is that fair to those students that actually want to hear a different viewpoint or actually want to hear that speaker? They each had a choice. There's always choices. You have the choice to listen, you have the choice to protest, and in reading this bill, I see that there's a lot of checkpoints, checks and balances in it. Now, we all admit that it's not perfect. It can grow. But I do see a lot of checks and balances, like having a hearing process. If I had had that opportunity, we would have never went to court. I just won my free speech battle in September. The judge ruled The fact that one person anonymously complained that a message does not rob, or hang on. The fact that one person anonymously complained about a message does not rob her of the right to convey her message to others who willingly accept it. So by having a policy right here put in place that protects the rights of those listening helps actually advance freedom of speech, because it allows those 100 people to hear something different that they may not have had the opportunity to hear. So reading the bill in whole, I see checks and balances. Yes, we have a little bit of an issue with the penalties and the harshness, but I see checks and balances by having, okay, the first time you get a warning. The second time, there's actually consequences. And the third time, obviously, by then you should have learned where that line was for infringing on other people's rights. And so when someone's exercising their freedom of speech goes across the line of something that's illegal and shutting down other people's speech in violent ways, which I'm so glad that they changed it from the Board of Regents version, because that one did not describe what was disruptive behavior. This one actually very, very clearly says this is the extent of that disruptive behavior that we're looking at and trying to take away from being enacted. So, in final remarks, I do see that this is a very useful tool for students to be able to actually stand up for their rights, because I had no idea what I was supposed to do until I met some people that pointed me to a law firm that was able to take my case. And that was the second time. The first time I was alone. So this is allowing students a process to actually be heard when they're having their rights violated.
Thank you very much, Polly, for your testimony. I'm sorry that I wasn't able to hear the very first part of it, but I did catch most of it. So your problem had to do, this goes to the whole free speech zones type of thing, and trying to keep people from expressing their rights in certain areas. So at your school, what kind of a free speech zone was there?
So the free speech zone that they wanted to ban me to was maybe 1/5 the size of the campus, which was right in the front entryway like we have right outside. That would be where the free speech zone would be. Not many people enter it. It's outside. It's cold, because most of our schooling is during the winter. So there really was no opportunity for students to have expressive activity on campus unless they wanted to freeze and be in a shut-off area.
Sure. So it seems to me that it took a lot of courage on your part to, to sort of take this thing to the next level, to work through the process on it. I have to wonder to myself, what or how many students are really willing and maybe sometimes even capable of going to that level.
I didn't
to
even want to
protect
go to
their rights.
school. After the first time, I didn't even want to continue my education. I was ready to throw in the towel and say, I am done with higher education because of what happened. But I knew better. I knew that an education is important, and I pushed through. But there are students that will just walk away. They won't go through the fight. And those feelings of being annihilated because of your viewpoint or your religion, they'll walk away. And that is what is happening, is you are losing students because of this kind of shutdown of free speech.
Anything in particular that you can put your finger on that helped you move forward? rather than throwing in that towel?
Well, the first time the school had wanted me to write a written apology for handing out my Valentines, and basically because they contain the words "Jesus loves you." And according to my faith, Jesus says that if you deny me before men, I will deny you before the Father. And I could not in any way deny him.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions for this Representative Shanklin?
Thanks for testifying. I'm so sorry to hear about the trauma you went through. I want to ask, I was trying to find the case. Can you please read me again the judge's ruling? It was something like one person anonymously complained about a message. I want to hear that again, please.
The fact that one person anonymously complained about the message does not rob her of her right to convey her message to others who willingly accepted it.
Thank you. So I think what struck me about the anonymously complaint about the message and one person being able to do that is, you talked about free speech zones, which this bill does not cover. It doesn't treat free speech zones. It doesn't. Okay, Legislative Council, is there any information regarding free speech zones in this bill? I already asked you this, but I'll do it publicly. Does this bill cover free speech zones? It does not specifically mention free speech zones. So that's another issue altogether. But what struck me is when the judge talked about one person anonymously complaining about a message, under this bill, under the section reporting, any person can make a report that another person has violated this section or policy. Now, I'll note, under that, they don't have to have any cause whatsoever. So if I wanted to make a false accusation against you or any of my colleagues on any college campus, I could do so. And if I wanted to conspire with my colleagues to take someone down, I could organize all three of these people right here. Let's just all make a complaint together. We could do so anonymously at the beginning until the investigation and the hearing. But as you know, that takes time. It's stressful. It's hard. No one wants to go through that. So what I'm concerned about is, you're talking about the toll that anonymous complaint had on you. The bill has that exact same language in it. And while the guise of this legislation may be protecting free speech, I would argue the fact that anyone can lodge a complaint against someone, founded or not, with no evidence or cause, will chill free speech and could harm people like you who are on campus exercising your rights. So I do want to point that out. It's a duty as a legislator to be thorough and diligent, and I was struck by what the judge said in the message and want you to know that allowing any person to make a report that another person has violated this section or policy is included in this legislation and could cause adverse harm to free speech rights of all students on campuses.
But there's also checkpoints. There's the hearings that are allowed. So the student actually gets to bring their case in front of others and not just that small group, which I was not allowed. My story stuck between that little bitty group and went nowhere. And then there's also the warning, the first warning. Then there's also education in the beginning of what your rights are. So I see there's checkpoints in it. Like I said, I think that there can be some improvements, but overall, I think that the bill is very helpful for students that face situations like me.
Thank you, and I appreciate your distinction there, but I just want to point out, you said in your own words that the reporting takes time and is tedious, and I think in the same case, no student wanting to go through that, I don't think any student wants to go through false allegations and having to go through disciplinary investigatory hearings, especially if it happens to them multiple times, because let's say you're just an outspoken person on campus who has views that others disagree with. They could feasibly, under this legislation, go through this process multiple times and be wrongfully accused multiple times. And what happens if at that point they hit the 3 strikes policy and it was unfair? And that's the piece that no one's really questioning is this assumes the process is fair and just every step of the way, but we can all find reports of wrongfully accused people imprisoned, wrongfully accused people. I mean, you can put due process written into law, but we have plenty of examples of people falsely and wrongfully using incorrect facts. And I feel it's our duty as legislators to be cautious and careful, especially when it comes to the Constitution. The Constitution covers this, and I think the success of your case shows that. I recognize the undue burden that you're talking about here, but I also want to point out this creates more burdens for anyone accused, and we have to err on the side of caution to protect all free speech rights. So again, I appreciate you coming today.
What would sound like you're saying that we should suspend our laws because somebody may be convicted.
No, before you put words in my mouth, I'm saying I don't have the
Well,
right to wrongfully
Well, you
accuse
just said there are all kinds of people in jail for crimes they didn't commit.
There are
so-
literally expungement bills and wrongfully accused payment bills that are bipartisan in the Capitol, so let's not make this partisan. But my point is
But we're not removing laws from the books
We're-
because of that.
actually, there are expungement reform bills in the legislature that are bipartisan, but this bill, what it does is it
That's
literally
different
grants
than
the
removing
right.
a law.
It literally grants the right to make a report for another person violating any section of the policy. Instead of protecting each individual and their rights, what it does is it creates an uneven playing field for someone who might want to misuse the law. Now, my colleagues on other issues use this argument, use due process arguments all the time. And so I think it's important to recognize.
You also spoke of an outspoken person on campus being at risk. There is no risk of being outspoken. There's risk of being a disruptor. I think that's very, very, very different. So I would ask Ledge Council to speak to the issue of free speech zones for a second.
Yeah, I guess using specific terms can be confusing for Ledge Council. Let's put it that way. There is a portion of the bill that would affect that. It wasn't specifically. It doesn't specifically mention free speech zones, but on page 6, lines 20 and 21, the principle is espoused as part of the policy is that the public areas of institutions are public forums and open on the same terms to any speaker. That's basically codifying existing law that says parks, sidewalks, streets, or similar common areas are public forums. But I don't know what happened in your specific case.
Yeah, and I apologize for using maybe the terminology that is a little bit different. Representative Whitkey, and you have a microphone.
And this time I got it to work. Thank you. Paul, I just wanted to say that I appreciate your testimony here today. As has been pointed out several times, it is always good to have students that are on campus come forward and give to us information that we may not get on a daily basis. So I really want to thank you for giving me another perspective on what's been termed as the chilling of free speech on our campuses. So I wanted to make that comment. And I have a question for Ledge Council now. Since it's been batted around several times, I might as well jump on this. So under current law, any university in our system can put in place disciplinary process that allows for anonymous complaints. Would that be correct in my interpretation?
I don't know. I don't know that there's anything specifically that says that. I mean, I think yes, they could. I don't know that there's anything that specifically advises them that they can have an anonymous reporting function.
So,
but
so it's
yes.
possible that our university system, there are campuses now that have processes that include anonymous complaints, correct?
I would guess that is correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Ballwig.
There we go. We're good. Thank you very much for being here, Polly. And here again, you're coming to testify to a legislative committee and spending more time in something that you are truly very passionate about. And so thank you very much for spending this time when you could be getting ready for Christmas and doing something else. But anyway, I think we're conflating some of your story with what the bill is saying. So just to clarify, in 2014, when this happened the first time, and then again in 2018, it sounds like it was some administrator at the university that made a decision, it possibly on just some speculation or some comments that someone made. There was no formal report that went through the process. Is that the case?
The first time they tried to keep it hush-hush. The second time there was actually a report about my disruptive behavior filed, and I countered it with a discrimination report. And within a week, they tried to get me to come in and talk to them without legal counsel. And I told them I'm not available until further notice, and I got Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty to come with me because I had already gone through the process of 3 months and at least half a dozen, if not more, meetings, and they had done nothing. So even in the face of a lawsuit, they still decided not to change policy until we filed.
So the second time there was a formal report that went to the university naming you and complaining about handing out Valentine's.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And I think that's important in getting that clarification because it sounds like possibly the university was trying to get on board with understanding a little bit better what they should be doing. This bill says any person can file a report, which you testified that it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but a formal investigation doesn't begin until 2 or more
Right.
complaints are filed. Regent Higgins mentioned that maybe as it goes through this process, it shouldn't stay on campus, that there should be some more objective panel done in listening to both sides. Do you have any comments on that suggestion as an improvement to this bill?
I do think that it should be removed from the administration themselves because they are very biased and they want to protect their name. And so by having some type of outside accountability for administrations to actually be executing these policies in a correct way, I think is very needed, because otherwise they're acting as if they're lawmakers. They're treating that policy as if it's law, and that's what they were doing to me. And I'm like, no, the Constitution trumps policy, and they didn't want to listen to that.
Okay, thank you very much, Polly.
Any other questions? Seeing none, Polly, thank you so much for coming and speaking to us today.
Thank you for listening.